Welcome to Beyond the Broadsheet, a podcast by the Lincoln County News. We are a community newspaper based in Midcoast, Maine, and provide the most comprehensive, in-depth coverage available anywhere of the 18 towns and one plantation that make up Lincoln County. My name is Emily Bracher, and I'm a reporter here at LCN covering the towns of Damariscotta, Newcastle, Edgecombe, and Whitefield.
And my name is Christina Brown. I'm also a reporter here at LCN covering the towns of Bristol, South Bristol, Bremen, and Noblesboro.
In today's episode, we will be concluding our series for Women's History Month, where we talk about a prominent female figure in Lincoln County by discussing the life of Mildred Burrage, who founded the Lincoln County Historical Association. In our second segment, we will be speaking with Martha Frink. But first, here are our top stories from the Thursday, March 26th edition of the paper.
In news out of Noblesboro, the Noblesboro Central School officials informed town residents of the estimated cost of addressing mold in the school during an open meeting on Saturday, March 21st. Remediation and repair, which includes replacing mechanical systems throughout the building, is expected to cost $4.4 million. The mold was discovered while assessing the building for planned improvements by Facilities Director John Carroll, who found elevated CO2 levels. Following inspections by senior mechanical designer Jeff Preble of the Turner Group, an architecture and engineering firm based in New Hampshire, found elevated levels of mold, with the highest concentration in the basement and concerning levels in the older section of the school, which was built in 1956. Carroll reviewed the findings with the school committee at a special meeting on March 4th. The NCS students had a remote learning day on March 6th and March 9th, as building contractors ensured classrooms, learning spaces, and common areas were ready for students to return. At a school committee meeting on Wednesday, March 18th, Carroll presented contractor estimates for the work required in the old section of the school. That work, which includes the mold remediation, new air handlers, and the cost of tearing out and replacing walls, floors, and ceilings needed, was estimated at $2,283,933. Carroll also recommended replacing the mechanical systems throughout the entire building, pointing to flaws with the boiler, which he called super inefficient, and the type of valves on the air handlers, which are prone to leaks. The current cost to replace all mechanicals is $2,173,000, which would likely include the installation of a 3-phase heat pumps. Carroll said the cost of the mechanical systems may be able to be subsidized in part by grants from Efficiency Maine. He also recommended fast-tracking the project based on estimated cost increases, saying the price of equipment had gone up about $500,000 in the last year. In addition to the remediation in the old section and replacement of the mechanicals, School Committee Chair Matt Benner said there is work that should be done on the new section of the building's exterior in the next few years that would include replacing windows and siding. He said the roof is also nearing the end of its usable life. Those additional projects could add 20% to the total. Benner said the committee sought advice from consulting firm Energy Efficiency Investments in order to explore all possible funding avenues. Energy Efficiency Investments recommended pursuing a lease purchase arrangement as opposed to seeking a bond for the money needed. While bonds require a town vote and must be used in full, lease purchase agreements only require a school committee vote and are more flexible. The lease purchase option would allow the school to act quickly and increase the likelihood that they can meet their stated goal of completing the critical parts of the work before school starts in September.
Over in Damariscotta, the Regional Chamber of Commerce and Information Bureau's incoming executive director is ready to connect with the community that raised her. Krista Thorpe will be stepping into the role on Monday, March 30th, after spending the last 7 years with the Island Institute, an organization with the mission to expand opportunities in Maine's more remote island and coastal communities. Thorpe also represents Bremen on the RSU 48 Board of Directors. Originally from Newcastle, Thorpe said she grew up during a golden age for the Twin Villages, a time when locals fought off big businesses like Walmart and when the community would participate in the arts in a public way. With this new role, she said that she is excited to see the energy that still exists for those efforts. As the chamber enters its next phase, Thorpe said she is excited to bring in more connectedness across the entire coast, region, and state. This will include the redefinition of business, which Thorpe said goes beyond the normal business model and includes other efforts such as partnerships between nonprofit organizations and public entities. I'm excited about the relationships that I get to deepen on this peninsula, but the new ones as well, Thorpe said. This area has changed so much in my 4 decades being a part of it. We've got something unique going on for us here. Congrats, Krista.
So excited to welcome someone new to the chamber. And some more news out of Nobleboro. A large number of voters turned up to vote at Nobleboro's annual town meeting on Saturday, March 21st. The largest discussion at the meeting involved the proposed funding for outside agencies who rely in part by funding from local towns. Requests under $10,000 were covered in one article that included provider agencies like New Hope Midcoast, CLC YMCA, Coastal Kids Preschool, and others. Scadumpha Library and Central Lincoln County Adult Education were voted separately. The total proposed budget of $52,166.63 represented a decrease of $6,952.37, or 11.76% from the previous year, and $16,582.24, or 24.12% less than what was originally requested by the organizations. According to Budget Committee member Peter Gabe, the committee approached Scadumpha Library about cuts to the institution's requested town contribution of $20,000. He said the library was able to lower the amount to $17,500, and based on that reduction, the committee decided to cut all recommendations for outside agencies by 12.5% across the board. Residents spoke out in favor and in opposition of the cuts, with voters ultimately approving the full amount requested. Residents also voted to approve the purchase of a new fire truck and voted to raise $50,000 for potential legal costs from a lawsuit brought against the town over a proposed 86-foot Verizon cell tower. An article to adopt electronic clickers for future town meetings has been voted down last year, but was back on the ballot following resident requests. In an ironic twist, the vote was close enough that moderator Don Means said, "I think I'm going to have a hand count." The clickers won, with a cost expected to be added to the 2027 budget.
Whitefield also had their annual town meeting on March 21st. Residents needed just over 3 hours to approve a 49-article warrant at the Whitefield Elementary School. A major theme of the meeting was the Select Board's push for residents to connect more with their neighbors. Discussing the $13,000 warrant article funding animal control services, Select Board member Brian O'Mani said the issue is not with loose animals, but with people who might not have a neighbor they can talk to. Other budget figures include the Select Board compensation, which was amended during the meeting. The budget, which originally totaled $22,313, was amended to fit the Budget Committee's recommendation of $22,922, which was an increase of $1,109, or 5.1% from the previous year. The Budget Committee decided on the higher amount because they felt that the Select Board was being a little bit too humble by not upping their pay. Everything else was approved without amendments.
The Scadumpha Public Library now has a long-awaited addition to its exterior. 2 cement lions were installed on the pedestals in front of the library in memory of the former executive director, Pam Gormley, on Friday, March 13th. According to the current executive director, Matthew Graff, lions were installed on March 13th to celebrate the 121st anniversary of Scadumpha Public Library's incorporation. Gormley, who passed away in January of this year, had wanted to install cement lions on the pedestals outside of Scadumpha to mimic the New York Public Library, said Tori DeLisle, a former coworker of Gormley's who assisted in having the lions purchased and installed. The lions, named Curiosity and Perseverance by the Gormley family, were moved onto the pedestals by Hager Enterprises of Damascotta, who donated their time and equipment. Stephen Monuments of Newcastle will be donating its time to fix each lion to its pedestal. So definitely, if you happen to swing by the library, go check out those lions because they're pretty cool.
March 21st continued to be a busy day for Lincoln County, the town of Allnut quietly adopting a mining ordinance at their annual town meeting. Approved almost without opposition, the vote was a quiet yet dramatic conclusion to an issue that was a hot topic of debate following Allnut's annual town meeting in 2024. That year, a mining and blasting ordinance developed by the planning board was rejected after a heated debate. In the months that followed, town officials agreed to divide the failed mining and blasting ordinance into 2 parts and develop separate ordinances for each subject. Following a contentious committee process that developed language over the course of 2024, Allnut voters ultimately adopted the blasting ordinance at the annual town meeting in 2025. Developed by the Select Board over the course of last year, the new mining ordinance codifies the standards for quarrying operations in town and regulates the type, size, and manner of such operations in an effort to ease the impact on local residents and the environment.
A record number of participants from across Lincoln and Knox counties are working towards achieving basic fire certification through the Lincoln County Fire Academy's Basic Fire course. This year, there are 35 students from Whitefield, Noblesboro, Boothbay Harbor, Westport, Waldoboro, Warren, Newcastle, Damariscotta, Bristol, and South Bristol, with a large portion of the class being made up of junior firefighters. According to Waldoboro Fire Chief Paul Smeltzer, who is running this year's class, this is the largest group of students the class has ever seen. Smeltzer said the course is designed to meet minimum standards set by the Maine Fire Institute and Bureau of Labor for interior firefighter certification. Unlike the more comprehensive Firefighter 1 and 2 courses, which are nationally certified, Basic Fire School focuses on foundational skills firefighters use regularly, particularly in rural departments. Students in the program are trained in essential firefighting techniques, including ladder use, hose operations, nozzle handling, and fire extinguisher application. The course also includes instruction on scene preservation from the State Fire Marshal, communication systems, and the National Incident Management System. Smeltzer said the students' reaction to the class has been very positive and hopes that the students will achieve the interior firefighter certification upon completion of the course in June. And now we are on to our second segment with Martha Frink.
And for our second segment, we have the final part of our Women's History Month series as March comes to a close. Today, we will be speaking with Martha Frink about Mildred Burrage, founder of the Lincoln County Historical... And for our second segment, we have the final part of our Women's History Month series as March comes to a close. Today, we will be speaking with Martha Frink about Mildred Burrage, founder of the Lincoln County Historical Association and the Wiscasset Art Gallery.
Oh, sorry.
And for our second segment, we have the final part of our Women's History Month series as March comes to a close. Today, we will be speaking with Martha Frink about Mildred Burrage, founder of the Lincoln County Historical Association and the Maine Art Gallery. Before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself, Martha.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you for inviting me to come on and talk about Mildred Burrage. Well, I've lived in Lincoln County for almost 50 years. And in and out. And I do have family roots here, in fact.
Wow.
My mother's grandparents are buried in Noblesboro, and I am a descendant of the Chapman Hull House.
Oh, wow.
So even though Frank was my late husband's name, part of my DNA goes way back.
Oh, wow.
That's really cool.
And at some point, landing in Wiscasset with my first family, I came to live in Mildred Burrage's house on Lee Street.
Oh, wow.
That's very cool.
It was very cool, and I had met her when I was in high school. I didn't go to school here, but I was visiting the family who I eventually married into, and Mildred Burrage's studio was right across the street.
Oh, wow.
And we would be sitting at the dining room table, and we would hear this long honking of a horn, like, really long. And the first time I heard it, I thought, what the heck? Anyway, it was Mildred Burrage leaving her studio, which is now called Castle Tucker. And the driveway was a little bit blind because there was a hedge. So she wanted to be sure that if she pulled out, nobody would hit her. So she would lean on her horn a very long time. But I did go to her studio one day, and it was upstairs at the carriage house, and she was working on one of her mica collages. And she worked flat down. The work was flat on a table, and so she was bent over it. And then when she turned to talk to us, she didn't change her posture. She was permanently bent over. She was that old. Her spine probably, she was born in 1890. Mm-hmm. And this was probably 1970-ish. Mm-hmm. So she was already 80 and had had a very, very active life. And she was still creating a lot of art and still very busy with all of the things that she was interested in. So that's how I first met her. And then towards the end of the 80s, I came to live in her house on Lee Street. And I knew that it had been her home, and I knew that she had made a mural that was on the wall. But I didn't know what the mural was about. And my neighbor at the time was Jane Tucker, who was also the town historian. And I asked Jane, what's going on in this mural? It's beautiful colors. There was a big, tall elm tree and little girls dressed in Victorian dresses. And one of them was playing with a hoop. I don't know if you know what that was, but it was like a hula hoop in a way, except they rolled it like a wheel. And there was a peacock on the lawn and all kinds of beautiful flowers, like big clusters of peonies. And then on the side, there was a summer house, like a gazebo. And in the distance, you could see a river and the tall masts of a ship. The colors were vibrant and reminded me of, an Italian painting. Jane Tucker said, I don't have a clue. I think you should invite Earl Shuttleworth. And he was at the time the commissioner of Maine's Historic Preservation up in Augusta. And I got in touch with him, and he came down, pleased as punch to be asked, I think. And it turned out he was one of her proteges.
Oh, wow.
And he told me how when he was a student at Colby College, she had hired him to work at the old jail, which is now the Lincoln County Museum. And that's how he saved up the money to make his first trip to Europe to study architecture.
Oh, wow.
So I said, is this Italy? He said, no, it's Bangor. You can imagine my surprise. He said, well, that was Mildred Burrage's grandmother and grandfather's home. It's still standing. And that summer house is still there. And in the distance is the Penobscot River. And those schooners are the lumber schooners that made her grandfather rich.
Oh, wow. That's
So,
really cool.
Later on, the interest was really piqued. The Wiscasset Library had a small file about her, and typical of a lot of places, an obituary, maybe a couple of things. But I learned right away that when she died in 1983, she had left the contents of her studio and all her papers to the Portland Museum of Art. Mm-hmm. So I hightailed it down there. I grew up in Portland, and I loved the Portland Museum of Art. And remember as a kid going there, going with the Brownie troupe and through school groups, and it was just one of the highlights of growing up in Portland was going there. This is before the edition was made, the big Payson edition, also called the I Am Pie edition. Anyway, just will never forget how awestruck I was with the statue of the dead pearl diver. And when you see something when you're little, it makes an impression. Mm-hmm. Anyway, when Mildred Burrage was approaching the very end of her life, the art museum was finishing with the construction of this new wing, and she evidently asked to be taken there. So she was put in an ambulance from her nursing home in Yarmouth.
Oh, wow.
And taken there. And, imagine, she grew up in Portland, so seeing this art museum that hadn't changed much since it was established like 1883, so not many years before she was born. So seeing this revitalization of a place where maybe she had some very early art instruction, learning how to draw from casts and, gas lighting. There wasn't even electricity there when she grew up. So this is quite a big change for Portland, that art museum adding that big wing. So anyway, it was the beginning of my research about that. Now, to go back to her life and not my part and my interest in her, looking at the stack of boxes in the basement of the Portland Museum of Art, it was just mind-blowing. I won't say that she was a hoarder, but she saved everything from her youth to her growing up. And she did have an extraordinary series of wonderful opportunities. Now, I'm going to mix up some of the ideas here of her influences, but growing up in Portland, her father, Henry S. Sweetser Burrage, was he was a veteran of the Civil War, and which is hard for us to think now that, you know, a few generations ago, people were involved in the Civil War. And he also was a doctor of divinity, and he was very interested in research and early history, the history of early Maine. Her mother, Ernestine, as I suggested earlier, was from Bangor. Her father, Moses Giddings, was a lumber baron. You know, a lot of Maine's history is wrapped up with anything to do with the harvesting of the trees of Maine, whether it was the mast for ships early days, ships for the Royal Navy, for the British Navy, or ships that went all over the world carrying more of Maine's lumber. The lumber trade was very big in the triangle involving, well, I'm not going to get off onto that whole subject because that gets into some other controversial parts of Maine's history. But anyway, her grandfather was a very wealthy man. She was, she went to public school in Portland, and her sister was only 18 months younger, Madeline, and so they were very close. Mildred, the older one, I found a little drawing Mildred drew of her new baby sister, and she said, "Here he is, it's Bob." Anyway, all her life, her sister Madeline was called Bob.
That's so silly.
And there were various nicknames for Mildred. Of course, Mildred's kind of a Victorian name. In fact, they were Victorian girls. Mildred was called Minty and Bingy, and, you know, there were all these other affectionate nicknames. She was rarely called Mildred by her sister. Anyway, at some point, her father was brought to Togus, the veterans' home in the Augusta area, to help the veterans of the Civil War there. And so the girls were uprooted, and they were moved to live on the campus of this vast, I think it was one of only 2 veterans' homes for Civil War veterans in the country.
Oh, wow.
And so there were a lot of people there, and Dr. Burrage and Ernestine brought the 2 daughters there. And so she ended up going to Coney. And her mother tried very hard to find art teachers for her, and she was pretty much came right out and said that there was no art at all in Augusta. Now, not making a statement about Augusta, but her father had gone to Brown University in Providence, and he and her mother decided that it would be best if she continued on her education in Providence at the Wheeler School. Now, Mary Wheeler had started the school. Mary Wheeler was a transcendentalist from Concord, and the Wheeler School was like the girls' version of Brown University, because at that time Brown University was only for young men. Mary Wheeler was also a painter, and Mary Wheeler had a summer home in Giverny, France. So in the summertime, she invited her favorite pupils to go with her. And so that was how Mildred went. She had not graduated from the Wheeler School, but she accompanied some classmates. And it was a very big deal. It was her very first trip to Europe. And that was, I would say, pivotal in her life. She had her own fire. She had her own talent. She had her own personal character and gifts and all that. But when she lived in that tiny community, which wasn't really known to many people at that time, yes, Monet lived there, but at that moment, people in Maine didn't even really know about Monet. people who were art collectors and philanthropists would know about Monet, but the average person in Maine did not know about Giverny. It was just a little tiny place. But it was occupied by many artists. It was the way Monhegan attracts artists, has attracted artists for over a century. So it's artists' colony, you could say. And Giverny was a place where a lot of American painters also gravitated. And so living with art all around her all the time as a young woman, 19, 20 years old, about your age. Emily, right?
I'm 22, so a little close.
And Christine. Anyway, so imagine being brought by your teacher to live in this. And they played charades, they had costume masquerade parties, and of course, during the day, Miss Wheeler hired some of these painters to instruct her students. So it's not as if Mildred went over to Paris and was a student of these painters. The painters themselves, like Richard Miller, Frederick Frascati, became very well-known American Impressionists. I think they might be called the second generation Impressionists. But nonetheless, Mildred, being a young woman, was with them. She saw them with their families and their wives and the tea parties and the dress-up times and the barn dances and all the things that they did. She was part of it. She said, I was with art people all the time. And she made some very significant paintings herself, some of which won prizes or some kind of acknowledgement, whether it was in Paris. She did win a prize in 1912, I believe. And she was also coming back to Maine, where she showed some of these works. And they were noteworthy for their composition and the colors and the style. So she went back and forth several times, and as I say, in all the things she saved, she even saved the menus from the ships that she went back and forth on. Of course, there were no flights. This was all by sailing vessels, steamships. And she saved the menus that they had on board. And she obviously had a little camera, and she took lots of pictures of her friends. They're shipboard, and they're wearing long, dark skirts and big funny hats and big puffy sleeve blouses, and was not anything that you would think young women would wear. But in other words, their attire made them look like they were already old. But anyway, so she continued on having art experiences. She lived in Paris for a while at a home of the ambassador, the United States ambassador to London, and Mrs. Reed was very interested in providing a home for single women, not like an orphanage or anything like that. I don't mean that, but just, remember, it was in the early 1910s and so on, and it wasn't proper for women to go live by themselves in Montparnasse or something like that. So Mrs. Reed was herself a very wealthy woman and was very involved with the Red Cross. The Red Cross keeps popping up in Mildred Burrage's life, too. Her mother, meanwhile, while this was going on, her parents had moved to Kennebunkport, and they bought two big old houses side by side. And this was the era of a colonial revival period where people were very interested in the past. Again, talking about pre-World War I. And they had these two big houses and started to get involved with life in Kennebunkport. And Mildred she came back, she taught at Miss Wheeler's school one year and said, no, I really am not a teacher. I don't really want to be a teacher. She just wanted to make art. She returned again to Europe, was painting in Rome and Venice, and then World War I broke out, as we say, the guns of August. period of time, that late summer, and her friends in Cheverny invited her to come back and be safe with them. Well, it wasn't safe for very long in France. And the war actually came to the little village. The doctor she was staying with and his wife stayed for a while, and he was helping with soldiers. And meanwhile, Mildred Burrage's mother in Kennebunkport had set up one of these houses as the Red Cross headquarters, where she got local ladies to get together and roll bandages for the soldiers. And so they were always very much involved with helping other people and activating when needed. Dr. Burrage, who had been, as I said, in the Civil War, but he was a prisoner of war in the Civil War. He was wounded at Cold Harbor. And I didn't mention earlier that he had 2 sons from his first marriage. His first wife had died, and he had 2 sons, and they also had gone to Brown University. One had become a medical doctor. The other was an archaeologist. His specialty, I think, was Crete. But at some point, he became a librarian in one of the libraries of Cambridge. And so Dr. Burrage went over there, planned how he was going to rescue Mildred, who was behind enemy lines. And the story that was carried in the Augusta newspaper was that he did bribe a troop train to bring him to that little village. And later on, I came across this letter of the woman who was the host of young Mildred, Mrs. Johnston. She wrote to Mrs. Burrage, Mildred's mother, when Dr. Burrage passed away, and said, "I'll never forget what it looked like to look through our little gate and see this man coming up the gate." And it was Mildred's father, her sweet father, had come here to rescue her. Was Mildred relieved and happy? No, she was mad as a wet hornet. She didn't want to leave, but she had not lived through war. And I don't think any of us here can say that we have lived where it was right at the edge of the town. Mm-hmm. And what can happen. Already Mildred had written about what it was like, because all the bells of the town, all the church bells were ringing, and government sent people to, remember, it was summertime. They hadn't collected the wheat and the grains in the fields. And the government came in and got all the horses that would be helping to hay and, harvest the crop. They took all the horses away to use in war. They didn't have trucks and, they just had horses. It was a different era. Anyway, Mildred came back to the United States, and she eventually had a studio in Boston, and that's when she started making her maps. Which I spoke about at a lecture for Lincoln County Historical. So she did a variety of things. She went to the Isabella Stewart Gardner, which wasn't called a museum then. It was a private home of Mrs. Gardner. It's called Fenway Court. I don't know if you've never been there. It's my favorite museum in the whole world. It's just really cool. Go to Boston. Go see it. It's called Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. You can have lunch there. But it was a villa type structure, and all the rooms were these magnificent master works, as well as altarpieces and tapestries and sculpture. And it really reminded Mildred of what it was like to be in Europe. Mm-hmm. So here her parents were in Kennebunkport going to little auctions and buying things to furnish these 2 antique houses. And here's Mildred going to Fenway Court and going, this is where I really feel at home. And in that collection of papers was the catalog from her visit at Mrs. Gardner's house. And she wrote in the margins, like, saw Sargent's painting of Madame X. She just penciled everything in. So what were her biggest influences? Well, her parents. They were always there for her. Sister was also her first cheerleader, if you will. They were very, very close. I don't know if either of you have sisters, but some people are lucky to have sisters who are close, and it's a special thing. Mm-hmm. And Miss Wheeler was certainly a very big influence in her life at that point. Then she tried all kinds of art. One of the things I most admire about her, I'm not going to say she was, Mary Cassatt kind of quality of paintings. Many of them are very interesting. Many of them are very good. Some are okay. But I'm not judging her from her art. I'm judging her from the fact that she tried so many things. Mm-hmm. And, she didn't just do one thing with her life. You asked about Jackson Pollock. So when World War II broke out, Madeline and Mildred went to Staten Island, and there was the country's first hospital set up for rehabilitation of wounded soldiers. And part of this was, I think, of course, I'm scratching my head, too, to remember all this stuff. I think Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, had a role in sponsoring teaching of arts and crafts to these soldiers. They had, what we would say today, PTSD as well as physical wounds. Mildred was hired by the Army to draw eyes. Soldiers who'd had eye surgery were terribly wounded in the face. Mm-hmm. Those works still exist in the Army Museum. And Madeline, I didn't really talk about going out west, but that's another whole thing. We could do another podcast on just that. And I could read you some of her letters, 'cause they're really a hoot. But these two girls would take a train out west. This was between the wars. And then buy a car out there and drive all over the place. And at some point, Madeline had encountered a woman who was a jewelry maker, and she had, a quick down and dirty art lessons from this lady from Philadelphia. And again, she just did it. She didn't say, oh, I'd like to do this someday. She just did it. And they would go out to mines and, just kind of roam around and pick up pieces that had been left behind by the miners. And, the miners were looking for a particular thing, let's say silver. And but the girls were looking for, big, bright, shiny gems that she could cut and set. And while she was doing that, Mildred was painting landscapes. So anyway, they had done this whole Western thing, and they just were actually having a ball doing that. And then when the war broke out, they did end up on Staten Island, and it was while they were there that they would go into the city and see whatever art they could find. And I think it was at the Peggy Guggenheim's gallery, where she saw the first show of Jackson Pollock. Now, Mildred was familiar with she was familiar with Pablo Picasso. I'm not going to say they were friends or they knew each other, but Mildred had gone to Gertrude Stein's salon, and Stein was, a place where Pablo Picasso was talked about, and maybe even was there. I don't think he was there at the exact moment. Mildred, she didn't say that she actually ate any Alice B. Toklas brownies, but sometimes I wonder. Anyway, she saw these first splatter paintings of Jackson Pollock, and they really resonated with her. And she said, "Oh, he's painting himself. He's painting. He's not just looking at a pretty scene of a lady with a parasol, a woman nursing her child, someone else sitting by the side of a reflecting pool. He was just doing something wild and crazy, and he was just expressing himself." Well, I can't tell you exactly, but you can only guess that at some point between that point, which was like 1943, so it was during the war, not after the war. Coming back to Maine and coming back to Kennebunkport, where they were very active in so many things. another word to use to describe Mildred Burrage would be philanthropist, because not only was she doing art, but she was very active in collaborating with others to save something important. Back to her father, who was, as I said, a researcher and writer about early Maine. He had said to her, if you ever have the opportunity to save just two buildings in Maine, it would be the Tate House and the Paddleboro Courthouse. Well, the Tate House in Stroudwater was the home for the massed agent for the Royal Navy. This is, before the United States was a country. And Stroudwater is a part of Portland. Well, Mildred became involved with the colonial dames who, after a period of time, wanted to purchase and save this building that was starting to be dilapidated. This is what happens, People build something, they're very successful. The winds of fate, whatever you call it, time, erosion, hard times, depression, maybe no one left who's interested in taking care of a property. The Tate family went in different directions after the war. Some were loyalists, some were patriots. And anyway, the Tate House, I think the year is 1755. She helped raise the money to purchase it, and it's a museum today that's worth going to see. Mm-hmm. Now I want to point out, so she was, and she was named in the history of the Tate House as the person who, along with Mrs. Payson, had the vision to pay $2,500. That's all it was. Of course, it was one of those things where someone had promised it to the colonial dames, but he died without a will. So then it fell into the hands of a bank, and the bank put a very high price on it. If there are any bankers out there, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, Mildred Burrage said, no, we have to do this. And, it was during the Depression. So it was, a lot of people didn't have a lot of extra money, but they raised the money and they bought it. And through the decades, they've helped restore it and furnish it with things that would have been there for the period, and have taken care of it ever since. So after World War II, I know I'm hopping all around, but just trying to answer some of the questions that you crafted. Mildred and her sister, who were still single gals, in 1946, Mildred was 56, and they felt Kennebunkport was not the same place where they had lived. It was different. It was becoming a summer home for a lot of places, for a lot of people, and some of the people that they loved who were there had passed away, namely their parents, and Booth Tarkington, a very good friend, and they just had done everything they could do. They needed something new. So at some point, and it might have been through organization like the Colonial Dames, Mildred Burrage had met Frances Sortwell of Wiscasset. And Frances Sortwell was a woman who was interested in saving old buildings, but in a different way. She would buy up a house and fix it up and sell it, as opposed to forming or collaborating with an organization. And she pointed out a house to the Burrage sisters that was available in Wiscasset, and they thought it would be suitable for them, and was the one where the mural ended up. Anyway, they bought it and moved there in 1946, so they sold both places in Kennebunkport. One of the people I've interviewed many, many people for this project. One of them was the daughter of, her parents had bought one of these houses, and she just had so many stories and so many artifacts and letters to share, which was just made things all come become very real. Anyway, they moved to Wiscasset, and they decided to name their house No Mingling on the Sheepskip, meaning they weren't going to do anything but their art. They were going to just focus Mildred on her paintings. Madeline had set up the kitchen for her jewelry making, and they were just going to focus on their art. That was in 1946. Right away, Alexander Bauer, who was the head of the Portland Museum of Art, said, "Wait a minute, girls, come on back. I want you to organize a show of arts and crafts in Maine." Well, Alexander Bauer was a powerful person and a painter in his own right, and also from their hometown of Portland. So they helped organize that, and that got them in touch with a lot of people in Maine who were engaged with blacksmithing and basket making and rug making and stained glass and all kinds of, sculpture and things that weren't maybe considered the fine arts. When I say sculpture, I mean maybe with wood. Anyway, they organized that show. At the same time, Museum of Modern Art asked Madeline, it's hard with the M&Ms, to have a show of her jewelry at MoMA in New York City.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, truth be told, I think Madeline outshined Mildred at that point in history, and that was really hard on the older sister.
I can imagine.
So she might have been, and at that time she had started, in the mid-50s she had started with her mica paintings. Mm-hmm. And that was probably a result of going to South Paris, Maine, and hanging around with the quarries there, where, while Madeline was finding gems for her bracelets and pins and necklaces, Mildred came home with, a few chunks of mica, and she started playing around with it. I'm abbreviating this whole experience because she was doing other things with mica before she actually incorporated it in a collage. Mm-hmm. But I think she had her first show of mica paintings, we might call collages, at the Courier in New Hampshire in 55 or 57, something about that time. And about that same time, Lincoln County decided to build a new jail. The jail they were using had been built in 1811, and it was still in use, and very old and inappropriate facilities. When it was built, there was a special area or floor for debtors, because up until a certain point, if people couldn't pay their debts, there was no such thing as a bankruptcy law. People were thrown in jail until they could pay them off. Of course, it's kind of counterintuitive. I mean, how could you pay off your debt? You're up there staring at granite walls. And women prisoners were held there. And the insane, I think the insane were thrown in with the women. So it was it was an appropriate treatment of people. And the county decided that they needed to improve that. So they were left with this empty building. If you've ever driven by it, it's a remarkable building. Part of it is the brick jailer's home, and then there's this huge granite part with granite chunks are, 30, 40 inches thick. I think it was quarried in Edgecombe. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it was an empty building. And Mildred and Madeline had just worked with all these craftsmen at the Portland Museum, and they said, look, here's an empty building, and we know all these people who want to show their stuff. And so she cozied up to Sheriff Waltz, Stanley Waltz. It's a very familiar name around here. And he said, I think that's a great idea. So, but they didn't want to just hand it over. They wanted to sell it. They wanted to make some money on it. And Mildred says, no, there's no way we can raise money like that. I mean, I think it was more than what the bank wanted for the Tate House. And anyway, she said, well, what if we, form a group? So she met on and off with the county commissioners. I'm sure her sister was sitting there nodding away. And the county commissioners just say, okay, let's see how we can pull this off. And having been at one point also the state penitentiary, they had to involve the state. Mm-hmm. Long and short of it is, right away, she had galvanized a group of over 400 people from like 11 or 12 different communities, not just Wiscasset. Southport, Newcastle, Bristol, Bremen, Nobleboro, and many people, Boothbay, Bath, Dresden. Dresden was a biggie, of the Augusta area. And they all forked over membership, and they were incorporated. And there's a photo hanging over there of Governor Muskie signing into law that the Lincoln County Museum, Lincoln County Culture, it was called Cultural and Historical Association at the time, came into being, and that they could acquire the old jail for $1 and the provision that they would always run it as a museum. So that's how that happened.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing.
Not long after that, the heirs of the Powellboro Courthouse in Dresden decided that they couldn't take care of this building anymore. And so that was the other building that Dr. Burrage had urged his daughters to do what they could to save. And so here they already had the association formed. So then, even though it was an awful lot to manage all at once, to take on this older building. So the Powellboro Courthouse, 1761, I think, is when that was built by the Kennebec proprietors, and that was also a great place for you to go. We have a little picnic. Both of you go over there. It's just magnificent building. 3 stories, and it was where court was held. Most of the cases were, of course, land disputes, settling land disputes, because people would come up and say, no, land was given to me by the king, or this land was given to me by this charter, and of course, nobody had actually surveyed it and created the real boundaries, so they'd have to go to court to settle that. But there also were some other higher crimes like murder.
Is this where the
Rape.
county commissioners originally met? Was there?
Well, originally, the Shire town of Lincoln County was there. Shire means where the sheriff presides, and originally that's why it's called Old Powellboro. That was the name of it. But as Wiscasset became a busier port, the customs were moved from the Kennebec, and all the county business was moved to Wiscasset, which was a very, very busy port. And the courthouse continued to be a place, I think they ceased holding court. The judges stopped going there. But, for a while, for a brief time in history, before and after the Revolution, it was a real active place. It was many, many things, a tavern, a post office. It was the gathering place in a wilderness. Mm-hmm. If you've ever read anything about Martha Ballard, the Midwife's Tale, or even Frozen River, which was a new novel inspired by Martha Ballard. She was a midwife in Hollowell, and but of course that was all Lincoln County then. Lincoln County, I think, was the second oldest county or the second biggest county, and it went all the way up to Norridgewock. Wasn't the same size county that it is today. Anyway, so they got the courthouse. And then the Bowman House, another house of a similar period, became available. And the 2 sisters bought that. They found other people to buy it. Bill Waters and Cy Pinkham, who were businessmen in the area and very interested in antiquities, they bought it. And so to just fast forward to today, and Bill Waters was instrumental in saving the Chapman Hall House in Damariscotta, which I might point out is 1 year older than the Tate House. He galvanized people over here to save that. I think the story was that it was going to be torn down and a gas station put there. That's usually the scenario that's portrayed to make people become very interested in acting promptly to help. All of this happened about the time that a lot of people were watching I Love Lucy, or a radio program that became a television program, Our Miss Brooks, who was about an English teacher who was constantly trying to find a husband. Well, Mildred wasn't trying to find a husband, but she was constantly trying to find people to do something. And a lot of people I interviewed would say, oh, if we saw Miss Burrage walking down the sidewalk, we'd cross over, because we knew we didn't want to say no. She knew she was going to ask something. She was going to ask us to do something. But we didn't want to tell her no, we didn't want to, or, whether it was money or time or, something. She just had to get everybody involved. And as a result of her doing that, we have all these things in our community, and they are active. They're places not only for people to go and learn about local history, but there's something about history. I think as some people feel that there's kind of a spiritual aspect to going back in time and learning about what happened, not just our own ancestors, but the people who lived here before us, and how they lived, and what they thought of, and what they cooked, and what they wore, and how they got along, or how they didn't get along, and why didn't they get along. These are all things that are stories that are told at the Chapman Hall House. They're told by various programs through, and the docents at the Lincoln County Historical, both places that you girls need to go check out. And the Bowman House is also available to be seen, I think. But they're all important legacies. So, yes, Mildred Burrage was a painter, and she was a philanthropist, and she was a preservationist. But first of all, she just was our Miss Brooks.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. That was more than we could have ever expected about her.
Well, we could make this a series.
Oh, I think we for sure could. And if we had a whole history podcast, it would be even better.
Oh, absolutely.
But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very
I have
much.
one more thing to add.
Yes, please.
In I want to thank Lincoln County Historical and archivist Savannah Clark, who just showed me recently a list of the very first founders, the very first members, a very long list. And as you can imagine, many of them were from Wiscasset, but they were all over, including Frances Perkins,
Oh, wow.
who was 5 years older than Mildred Burrage.
It wraps it together with our first part of the series.
It does.
So strong women. Let's hear it for the gals.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Absolutely.
every day we could talk about this and it'd be
Yeah.
awesome. But yeah, and thank you to the listeners who've joined us for this series.
This has been really fun to do.
I know,
I've really
it's been-
enjoyed hearing all of the history about these women in Lincoln County. And it's been really cool to hear that there's such rich history so local to us as well.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you for joining
You're
us.
welcome. I enjoyed it too.
We will see you all next time.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Broadsheet, a podcast by the Lincoln County News. This podcast is produced by Lucas McNelly and Maya Zewert. Tyler Davis of Tyality Productions provides production support. Our theme music is by Stu Mahan and LCN Associate Editor / Bassist Sherwood Olin. The Lincoln County News hits newsstands across the county every Wednesday afternoon. And you can also access our work online at lcnme.com. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion, please email us at info@lcnme.com. As always, we're grateful for the support of our readers and listeners in Lincoln County and beyond. It's been great catching up today, and we'll talk with you again soon.